Welcome everyone. Hello. So my name is Caroline Petit. Maybe I'll say a few words about myself first. I'm a specialist of ancient medicine, and I came to the UK back in 2004, right after finishing my PhD, to work on a Wellcome Trust project at the time on Galen's Treatise on Simple Drugs. I've been continuing working on ancient pharmacology, and clearly my area of expertise is more the medical text from the Roman Empire. But due to my original training in classics and French, I'm also happy to talk about earlier literary text, including Hippocrates, which is a firm favorite of students, I have to say. So if your students are interested in studying ancient medicine, please send them on to Warwick, because we have a rather popular module on ancient medicine in classics here, which I'm running basically. And yeah, so medical text, and as I tried to explain in my little video, which hopefully you've had a chance to see before coming here, I also ended up working on villains, and it took me a lot more time and energy than I thought, because writing an anthology, I don't know, I thought it wouldn't be something where I would have to put much of my own voice, but in reality, you end up thinking so much about the selection and the reasons behind the selection you make in the different chapters, that in the end, it's like a discourse you're actually writing in a kind of subdued, maybe concealed way. So I got very interested in that, and the Barbarians were part of it. Now, a disclaimer, I am by no means a specialist of the Barbarians generally, or as it were, the other topic, which was extremely popular in scholarship a few years back. So that is not my field, but I try to look at this with fresh eyes, and I hope that somehow I will also learn from your questions and your comments, because I'm really eager to get some feedback on this. Another disclaimer is that I'm not really very aware of how exactly things are run in secondary schools in England, and how you teach exactly those topics, and especially this topic. And I don't know if, for example, you tend to look at it with the students from an open perspective, questioning the terms of those questions, or if you, on the contrary, try to deliver something that's quite square, so to speak, and more, aiming more at delivering a content than questions. So I'm not too sure about that, which is also why my talk was a little bit conversational and slightly informal. And I hope we can continue in this way with this Q&A. But anyway, I'm talking too much, and I would be happy to take questions if you have any. Yes, I see a hand here. Alistair?
Hi, I just, in your lecture, you talked about ethnocentricity, and then also mentioned racism for both Hippocrates and Herodotus. I wondered whether you felt that there were perhaps hidden meanings in Herodotus that are under the surface, that while he purports to be even-minded towards barbarians and talks about their great achievements in the introduction, whether there's a kind of further voice in there, a hidden message, which is perhaps more what we term as racist or ethnocentric.
Thank you, Alistair. That's a really good question. I find that a difficult question to answer, because to me, Herodotus is one of those authors which scholars have for a long time kind of taken maybe not seriously enough, and nowadays there is more attention to the kind of polyphony in there. And so, talking of Herodotus' message is something I find a bit difficult to pin down or to relate to in this way. I think it's a bit tricky, and that's also what makes it interesting. I would not go as far as calling Herodotus a racist, because I struggle with, the idea of putting labels on ancient authors, which mean a lot to us and can be helpful in a way to kind of tackle broader questions. But I find it really difficult to say, okay, I believe Herodotus has a kind of racist approach to the others, etc. And you mentioned ethnocentricity. Again, that is something, I maybe learned in school myself, that there is something Hellenocentric to Herodotus' speech, talking about, we all know this passage, a quite famous passage about what unites the Greeks, this community of language and so on. I wonder if that is enough to talk about ethnocentricity. What I would like to do is, in fact, to read again Herodotus personally, because I'm not the expert on Herodotus either. I teach a bit on Herodotus, but not so, I don't have the kind of expert view that some have. I would like to look at it again now, after reading other things, especially Hippocrates, and reading studies such as Claude Callam's study about the importance of perspective in the text, and the importance of the fact that the author is not necessarily embodying like a Greek voice or the voice of the Greeks. And I think for both Herodotus and Hippocrates, there is a chance that there is uncertainty, and that uncertainty can be productive in reading the text. I don't know if I answer your question. I hope it's not disappointing, because I'm not delivering any truth on Herodotus or Hippocrates, but I think it's interesting that both of them were, Greeks from Asia, so to speak, and so we're not exactly in the mindset of an Athenian author kind of contributing to the wider Athenian project, so to speak, which has been called imperialist. And I think Herodotus and Hippocrates are somehow at the margins of all this rather than part of this. But that's just my opinion. Paul has just written, he's given us the reference in Herodotus. Thank you, Paul, about the Greeks, Hellenes, having a shared speech, religion, etc. Yeah. What I find interesting and also a bit dangerous is it's very easy to take snippets of text and comment on them regardless of the entire work, which is what I find so difficult with Herodotus, because it's a long, long text, and it has so much to say about different people of his time, that if you want to really see a message about, ethnies in there, it's actually quite tricky. You really have to go into a really in-depth kind of study to make the text speak in a relevant way, if you want to frame it in the terms of racism, ethnocentricity, etc. I can see another question. To what extent the word barbarian is used with a calibrated underlines, and to what extent, I'm not sure I understand your question, and to what extent just as part of vocabulary familiar to the readers in ancient writings? That's a good question, because what do we know exactly about the readers of those texts? We usually infer things about their audiences from what we have in the text, like trying to connect the way a text is written and its intention, and therefore the audience that is targeted. So I am not sure. I think overall those texts tend to use words that are familiar to their audiences, and if it's not the case, they tend to add something, like explain, and maybe gloss a little, like this term being used here to mean that, etc. But that's maybe also because I come from a strong background in technical text where communication, clarity is essential, and really terms are really pondered in a certain way to kind of not leave the audience hanging or behind. So yeah, I'm not sure. I think Barbarian would have been something quite clear to the audience at that point. But maybe I'm only speculating here.
And in your talk about Medea, and you used the word evil in connection, the idea of a concept of evil, and I'd wondered whether you could say more on that, whether you felt that Medea was, whether we could determine her as being evil as opposed to just other.
That's an interesting one too. Evil, I guess, because my project was on villains generally, I ended up thinking about evil, which in a way is perhaps more a more relevant notion to us, even probably with our religious tradition, Christian tradition. Yeah, so is Medea evil or just other? That's interesting because I think she's never presented as the ultimate evil. I mean, she can be presented as a really scary, threatening figure. Think of her role in Seneca, where all the scary aspects of her character are really emphasized and put forward in a very striking visual, I would say, way. But is she evil? I think she is more of she's a more complex character than just evil. And this is why she keeps being an object of interest for later writers. I think she is deeply ambivalent. I mean, the ancients from Euripides, but onwards, but not just in Euripides, thought she had grounds to be angry and to seek revenge. She gave everything to a man who took her from her country to his own and then abandoned her, and that was, you see that in the scenes, I was going to say the dialogues, but they're not exactly dialogues, are they? In Euripides, where she stands against Jason. So is she evil? I think she's rarely presented as evil unless you look at her as a kind of, because she becomes almost a common noun, right? A Medea is a poisoner, is a criminal, is whatever. So she came to embody crime in a certain way. You think of the way Cicero and many writers use the phrase "a new Medea" every time there's a poisoner around. So yes, so she is the arch criminal from a certain perspective, but at the same time, she is a criminal you can relate with. So evil is maybe too strong a term for her, even though her crimes are, scary and meant to be worrying and so on. But as I was trying to say, there are different aspects of her that conflate and make her so threatening a figure. That she's a woman and she's a foreigner and she has this knowledge, which is extremely worrying especially for a male audience, apparently. So yeah. Yeah, someone said in the chat from a masculine perspective, perhaps, yes, absolutely. Medea. So Euripides has a way to present things that is often sympathetic to female characters, right? It's not exactly a caricature of, this male anxiety going on in ancient text. But yes, I mean, there is something there. And there is, as I was discussing with Daniel Mendelsohn, he also mentioned the monsters, the many feminine monsters that you have in Greek myth, and they are not female for, by chance. They kind of embody the anxieties of a patriarchal society, in fact. So the evil, so to speak, has to be female in a way or another. And she is that, and she's also in addition to that, a barbarian. So that's a lot. But you know, think of many texts that are actually quite beautiful, you know, speeches that she makes in tragedies, or this text I shared with you from Callistratus, where she is this, you know, what's fascinating about her is really this moment where maybe she's going to do it, maybe not, and she's in the moment just before committing the crime, and that's what captivated ancient minds, I think. Well, literary minds at least. There is a raised hand from William. William, do you want to?
Hi, yeah, sorry, quickly, just on that last point, I'm sure everyone else has a different opinion on this, but do you think for the Greek male audience sort of watching, that Medea's, her sort of inversion of her gender role as a woman, or her presence as a foreigner, which one do you think would be more frightening to them? Is it the fact she's a barbarian, or perhaps it's the fact that she's a woman sort of turning their world upside down?
Good question. I think, as you say, it may be a question of personal reading there. I think it's really both. I think you find both elements strongly expressed in the text, as far as I remember. And I'm thinking also of the way Medea was staged. You may be aware that there was a Medea at Warwick with student actors a couple of years back, and the way they represented somehow the kind of powerful background of Medea was with a set with a massive library, right? A bit like my background just now, but something supposed to evoke her kind of knowledge from elsewhere, you know, from abroad. So I think it's really both. I think it's really combined. I think maybe the foreign element is, but that would be just my opinion. I think maybe it's more strongly represented in a Latin literature, but I do remember Jason saying, well, no Greek woman would dare committing such a crime. Like, it's really, he has this line where he says, like, only a foreigner like you, a barbarian, could do such a thing. So it's really both, really. I'm not sure I can decide what is more important for a male audience of that time at that point, really. But if others have ideas, please share, please come in about this. Yeah, someone suggested perhaps a comparison between Medea and the Amazons in this respect, like the kind of threat that they represent as foreigner and female. I think it's a good idea, good point. Paul has added information about that performance at Warwick of Medea, if you're interested. It was quite successful, it was quite good, actually. Please come along next time we have a play. We attempt to have one every year, but with COVID, frankly, I don't know what's possible. It's a special year. I don't know. I think if we look at tragedy specifically, we look at female characters, and God knows there are many of them. I think most of them, if you forget about Medea, most of them are threatening and worrying as female characters rather than barbarians. So really Medea is a bit special in there, in that bunch. Think of Clytemnestra, who is almost a male figure in her, you know, kind of powerful, assertive way to say, well, no, I won't have this husband of mine back and carry on as normal after what he did to my daughter. So, I mean, there's something there that's really about the female characters more generally, and the foreign bit, the barbarian bit, is something that comes in addition in Medea. But if you have some spare time, do go and read Hippocrates to, you know, kind of put Herodotus in some kind of perspective. Some people have tried to do that. I should have put that on my slides last time. There's a book by Rosaline Thomas, if you're familiar with it. It's on, I think it's called Herodotus is it Herodotus in context? I don't remember. But Rotherline Thomas has a book on Herodotus, which draws a lot on Hippocratic text and tries to combine the perspectives of both authors to look precisely at that, if I remember correctly, the way they present other people and so on. So yeah, if you haven't read Hippocrates, you will find interesting parallels, not just for Persians, but also for Egyptians, the Scythians, so all kinds of different people that were interesting apparently to audiences at the time.
I found it really interesting and also a little bit scary. I probably, as a teacher, wouldn't, well, certainly not at the moment. I don't think I would choose this module, you know, for the classical civilization course, partially because probably a feeling I don't know so much about it, but just to kind of give a teacher's perspective on, you know, that at a school level, with Hippocrates, it's really, if you're teaching, when I'm teaching Latin in year 8, there's a really tiny bit for the kids. They love it, and there probably needs to be more for them, but this is perhaps an area, you know, that we need to think about, but you know, it's kind of filling in the gaps. But just going back to what you were saying at the start in terms of, you know, labels, and I think as teachers, that's what the kids want. They want to think about, like, is an author, they want to give a label, and those are the kind of answers they want. So I think as a teacher, it's quite difficult for us, but you know, it's good to hear your perspective in terms of how we can say it's, you know, it's ambivalent. So that's really useful. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for giving me the perspective of a teacher, because as I said, I'm kind of shooting in the dark with this to an extent, because I haven't, I was taught in a different country, and then, you know, it would be completely different, I suppose. But yeah, so I understand that. I'm not suggesting you should pile up things to read for them, because it may be overwhelming, but maybe, yes, kind of keeping a kind of window open that maybe things are a bit different in antiquity, and that's what makes it also exciting, because all we have is those texts, which in themselves are just reconstitutions of, you know, what probably the author wrote, and we have to be very careful, and there are so many issues with translation.
Yeah,
it's easy to project our own ideas, interest, and understanding onto those texts, and if you compare different translations, you will be surprised, and perhaps that's something they could be made you know, aware of ever so slightly, to just, you know, introduce a kind of openness
in terms of Hippocrates. Could you suggest a translation? I mean, I have no idea where to kind of even start there.
I think the easy way, I mean, it's available in the Lub series, but some of them are fairly recent and fairly good. Others date back to the 1920s, so the translations can be a bit old-fashioned. But I suppose the easiest thing is to get a copy of Hippocratic writings in the Penguin series, because it's very cheap. And you have translations by different people, but they are quite, I mean, you could discuss those translations, obviously, but it's convenient. You have a lot of important works of Hippocrates that you can read and compare, and, you know, it's not great in terms of notes or, you know, to contextualization, but at least you have the text, and it's already something.
Super, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Well, thank you everyone for your questions and for the opportunity. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Breaking the decks, go West, go West!